So good morning again, or early good day. I'm just going to jump right in. Our panel today, our dialogue is about circulation, and um, in discussing this with my friend and colleague Megan Forbes, who's also been a key co-organizer and conceptualizing the symposium, we were specifically talking about how to describe the symposium, and she suggested we use the word tapestry, which is not a metaphor that would have come to me. That's partly because I'm really thinking of the weird confections of upholstery and furniture in my living room. I'm more partial to the idea of the telescopic, that is, to make some distant objects seem near or relevant, perhaps by design, because they are what we have use for. The opportunism here is important to acknowledge so that we can go about our business in the present day of hosting discussions about big words and ideas within the enclosed and ranked spaces of a particular kind of space, capitalist space. With that said, the session at hand about circulation of ideas will ask us to think telescopically with enchantment at its core. I use enchantment specifically as the operation of religion and gods, defining the syntax of circulation. I'm not so concerned with with belief, that is, whether or not the doctrine of religion holds water in the mind, but rather in its invocation and what that says about patterns of circulation. We don't speak often of religion in modern art museums, and I'd like to explain myself, where the pantheonic code of all under one roof obtains instead a discourse of censorship or bans or nations. The deferral of religion in this case is not so wide of mark from the barbarians of C.P. Cavafy's poem Waiting for the Barbarians, where senators in the forum are discussing the arrival of the barbarians, how to unveil themselves with fancy accoutrements into the barbarians' good books. Excitement lives in the waiting, not in contrast, in conversation or circulation. And the poem ends like this: because night has fallen and the barbarians haven't come, and some of our men just in from the border say there are no barbarians any longer. Now what's going to happen to us without barbarians? Those people were a kind of solution. Today's speakers will consider, among other things, enchantment not in opposition to the secular code of current modern society. And here I mean secular by its common usage in English as the correlative opposite of religious, not then in its impoverished definition as some kind of imaginative potential or the air you breathe, or merely as the air you breathe, but given rise to through actions, objects, rituals premised on correlation to belief systems, if not exclusively guided by them. I offer two ideas to deliver my stakes in this session. Each instance marks a moment of conversion, dexterously absent of the visible assault of one culture upon another, certainly embedding violence, but also deferring it, in this case, in the necessary fog of communication and miscommunication that accompanies a greater signification. So to start off, the first point I'd like to make is about the fortunes of conversion in the face of the abstract cognitive space of comprehension or miscomprehension. And I want to start us off with this image from the early colonial document by the friar Bernardino de Sahaguns, showing called the General History of the Things of New Spain, or the Florentine Codex, showing Malinche acting as interpreter to Hernán Cortés, the Spanish conquistador who spearheaded the meeting and consequent war with Emperor Moctezuma and the Aztec Empire, before overseeing the takeover of swaths of Mexico for subjugation to Spanish rule. Malinche, or Malintzin, was Cortés's interpreter and guide throughout the momentous first meeting with Moctezuma in 1519, until 1527 or 1528, when still in her 20s, she died young. Malinche was a Nahua noblewoman from central Mexico who, after being either stolen or sold as a slave, grew up further east in the kingdom of the Chontal Maya, near the Gulf Coast. Her facility with Nahua, which is a central Mexican language, Chontal Maya, Yucatec Maya, and subsequently Spanish, made her integral to Cortés's bloody traverse across Mexico. By all accounts, visual and documentary, he never let her out of sight. So much so, the Nawa viewed them as a single construct, earning Cortez for a while the moniker of Malinche, as if the conquistador, language, and his religion, Christianity, were one. Matthew Restall, the peerless historian of the conquest and early colonial period in the Americas, contours this relationship in the terms of myth-making. Malinche, he suggests, is one of the great myths of communication and miscommunication, one of 7 he defines to chart the epistemes of circulation and conversion during the conquest and its aftermath. The 1513 edict, known as the requerimiento, or the requirements, is an exemplary offshoot of the myth that pinpoints the simultaneous disregard and centrality of interpreters during the conquest. Conquistadors were required to read the requirement before attacking indigenous populations, to inform them about what Restall calls a chain of command from God to Pope to monarch to conquistador, the preordained donation of all lands that the conquistador was ordained to claim through conquest. The subsequent conversion by missionaries would then vindicate. That the text of the requirement and reports about it do not mention interpreters or their role as facilitators enunciates precisely the mutually affirming dance of comprehension and miscomprehension, or incomprehension. The Spanish believed that their indigenous interlocutors were fully cognizant and comprehending of the words spoken to them, while the Nawa, regarding what the Spanish spoke as babble, were prone to disregard the necessity of plumbing its meaning. The synaptic space of conquest and conversion in this construct, for me, suggests a kind of lateral empathy between 2 kinds of consciousness at cross purposes with each other, at the heart of which lay the fate and fortunes of conversion, indigenous to Christian and vice versa, such that Christianity became an indigenous phenomenon. This synaptic space of conversion and the peculiar relation between stability and instability of meaning is also where the magic happens, and where the session will cast its efforts to work through the process. My second example is related to the idea of religion and a place for death in the landscape. It's specifically about scaling up death in the landscape. And here I'm interested in discussing the natural landscape as a scaled up tomb. The pristine natural landscape becomes a place to reconsider the choice between death and conversion. And to make this move, I will end with a few stills from the end of a film, a recent film, Sama, made in 2017, an adaptation by the Argentine filmmaker Lucrecia Martel of the eponymous Argentine novel by the Argentine writer Antonio Di Benedetto, published in 1956, which was only recently translated by Esther Allen in 2016 into English. And the slow uptake of the English language in this case is, what was already declared a classic is a sort of a subject for a different essay, but we should be just grateful for Esther Allen for having translated this book. Quickly, a few notes about this book and how it's relevant, and the film, how it's relevant to the point I'm trying to make about place for death in the landscape and religion. The book is a story of waiting. It takes 3 chapters, each set respectively in 1790, 1794, and 1799. Diego de Sama, a native-born bureaucrat of Spanish blood in the provincial backwater, yearns to be transferred to Buenos Aires. Each attempt of his is defeated. He ultimately has to stay in the backwater. But ultimately, he starts moving away from it. The book charts that yearning, that defeat, that pathetic traverse. And he goes rogue and heads off with a ragtag bunch of bounty hunters and treasure seekers, ending up alone in the wetlands of the Pantanal. His hands cut off, stumps green by the set-in of gangrene. He's being borne unconscious in a dugout canoe stewarded by a young Guarani boy and a boatman. Here I just want to show you one of the scenes from the penultimate moments in this film where he's with this group of people and he's going through the Pantanal. The floodplains of the Pantanal, in this case, is an sort of an important moment. The Pantanal is an enclosed riverine delta of shallow lakes and swamps fed by the upper Paraguay River, hosting a biome of rushes, flowers, and grasses floating on the upswell of underwater streams in seasonal ebb and rise. Most of the Pantanal occupies a Midwestern state in Brazil, some extending into portions of Bolivia and Paraguay. And in the film, we're in the Pantanal of what is Paraguay, which is where this novel is set. Martel, in the film, taking us to the Pantanal at the end is really significant. It is the third section of the book. It's set in 1799. It's the year Alexander von Humboldt has already landed in Venezuela. And he's started traveling towards the Llanos on the Orinoco River. And the Llanos is the sort of equivalent of the Pantanal east of the Andes. Humboldt's trip establishes the existence of an underground canal, of a circuit of transmission between the Orinoco and the Amazon rivers, and also where they divide, that bifurcation, so to speak. He also is interested in the idea of a synapse, where things meet, how conditions situate themselves at the point of transfer, where they bifurcate. In the final scene, and this is just 3 stills from the very last scene of the movie. Journeying has taken everything out of Sama. His cohort has proved violent and traitorous. His hands have been cut off. He's in this dugout canoe with a boy. He might be dead. We don't know. The craft masters its course through algae and water hyacinth, laying a supple green cowling over the drenched marshes. In its own form of creature inquisition, the algae laps the side of the boat, with the young boy asking pointedly of Sama in Spanish, ¿Quieres vivir? Twice. ¿Quieres vivir? Do you want to live? Then the boy reaches low into his chest and speaks something in Guarani, left unsubtitled in the film for the devices of our imagination. And this is the crux of the conversion. What will it take to live? Will the Pantanal, the landscape, become his tomb? I want to end here to think through the idea of the tomb and the conversion writ large across the landscape, but also small in the exquisite richness and quietness of objects that pass hands and signs across centuries. What happens to the synapse? And what might that tell us about how to contour the synapse in a museum that is now looking at the world? Please welcome Anuradha Iyer Siddiqui and Cécile Romont.